welcome His Excellency Oscar Fernandez-Taranco, the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations for Peacebuilding Support. This is actually the second time I have the pleasure to interview you. The first time was in November 2014 when we hosted the, I thought it was the first event that actually, for all practical purposes, kick-started the review of the Peacebuilding Architecture. So here we are 4 years later. So what happened during the last 4 years? How far are we in reforming the Peacebuilding Support Office, the Peacebuilding Architecture at large?
Well, first of all, let me thank you again for the honor and privilege to be here today with you and the many colleagues that have put together this extremely important conference. You're right to say that back in 2014, we were still exploring how to undertake a relevant, significant, independent study about the peacebuilding architecture. And I think we have come a long way, not just because of the process that led to the HIPPO report that we discussed this morning, but also because of the twin Security Council and General Assembly resolutions on sustaining peace and peacebuilding, which I think have significantly contributed to the rethinking of peacebuilding as an important endeavor to undertake before, during, and after a conflict cycle. And I think that particularly is important because it helps rethink how peacekeeping operations should be designed, how the mandates can be better adapted to this new reality that many peacekeeping operations and a lot of the challenges that many governments have in sustaining peace, in including peace building as part of their development strategies, their national development strategies. So a lot has happened, and I think this particular conference is adding to the momentum of translating concepts.
How so?
So how so? Several issues. First of all, the twin resolutions on sustaining peace that basically put conflict prevention very much as a goal and as a vision of society, if you will, to address outbreak, escalation, continuation, and relapse into conflict, required elements of how we translate this thinking into actual practice. I think the Action for Peace is a significant piece of that articulation, of operationalizing the concept of prevention in the thinking of peacekeeping operations. And for this, I think we have to really thank Egypt, because I think Egypt played a very important role in the articulation of this concept in the Security Council when you were members of the Council, and particularly that PRST, the presidential statement that was stated in December of 2017.
Our last act.
Your last act, but it was sort of a very important concluding act, because it brought all the different strains of the reform, of the thinking, of the reviews into one concrete set of operational recommendations. And if you look at Action for Peace, I would say that many of the key elements as they relate to the primacy of the political solutions, to the importance of addressing protection issues, to the importance of looking at people-centered approaches, to the importance of partnerships, and last but not least, the importance of conduct of missions, and this notion of peacekeeping, peace building, sustaining peace, which was really brought into this Action for Peace. So I think this particular conference that you are organizing here is a true manifestation of all the ingredients that need to go now into this new setting in which peacekeeping operations are being deployed. You have the elements of partnerships, so the many member states, the troop contributing countries, the police contributing countries. You have the partners from regional organizations, the African Union. You have certainly the United Nations that has shown up in great force to be part of this discussion. You have as well your think tanks and your partners, if you will, in terms of the framing of the policy dimensions. And I think this will add a lot of momentum to the deliberations of the Security Council, but equally important to see how the Peacebuilding Commission, in its advisory role to the Security Council, can help start bridging a lot of these elements in its advisory role to see what are the challenges from a peacebuilding perspective, how we we bring more inclusivity into the relationships between these peace operations, national governments, and different stakeholders, national stakeholders, and the sub-regional dynamics, the sort of the regional context in which many of these peace operations deploy, that require a more comprehensive approach, that require a more strategic approach to engage the neighbors, the regional organizations, the international financial institutions, and many other partners. So really I want to congratulate you, your team, really thank the government of Egypt for taking this initiative at a crucial moment when the UN is rethinking its structures, is reprioritizing its funding mechanisms, and is engaging in a new way of partnering, if you will, with its important interlocutors.
Addressing the question of performance across not only peacekeeping but the continuum of peace interventions has been a major concern for Egypt, and is something that we worked on very strongly, including the presidential statement of December 2017. And this conference, you're right to say that it was an attempt to continue this conversation alive, to address it in a comprehensive manner, especially that we are witnessing some attempts to narrow the conversation and to focus primarily on the issue of the performance of the peacekeepers and not on the mandate design, mandate implementation, equipment, leadership, so on and so forth. But maybe underlying all of this is an attempt that this conference actually ends with concrete recommendations and action points, so that action for peacekeeping doesn't stay something theoretical.
Exactly.
And so asking the Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Support, what would be the 2-3 main recommendations, action points that you would like to see coming out of this conference?
So because this conference is actually entitled From Mandate to Exit, I think it is extremely important, and I think one of the strong action points should be, how do we articulate a peace-building strategy at the time of the formulation of a new mandate, at the time we renew the mandate during the course of the mission, and at the time when we start thinking about the transition out. Factoring in peace building would, in a way, force the mission and those who are involved in formulating the mandate to factor in the need for national ownership, the need to align a government's consent to the mission, but also the government's priorities and strategies in addressing its peace-building challenges, to align the peace-building parts of the mission mandate to the national peace-building priorities would be also a way to address the issue of political solutions and inclusive processes that involve the participation of all the national stakeholders in our line of work. One could almost say that without a peace-building strategy, it is very difficult for a peacekeeping operation to have an exit strategy. Yeah. And that peace-building strategy, at the heart of that peace-building strategy, needs to be efforts that speak to the reconciliation of the nation, that speak to the importance of building strong national institutions so that these functions can be transferred back to national governments and the national stakeholders. So
do you think, when I was moderating the first session,
yes,
I threw in, just to test the waters, the concept of quadrilateral cooperation. Because we consume a lot of time talking about trilateral cooperation, UN Secretariat, the Security Council, the troop and police contributing countries. But as we move to, number one, to focus our work not on interstate, rather intrastate. As you just rightly said, in my opinion, want to engage host nations in this conversation. Do you see that there is a potential for a development in the thinking, a change in the mentality to move from dealing with nation states as a subject of our trilateral cooperation to a new formula where, especially when we approach the exit from peacekeeping into peace building and hopefully sustainable development after that, that we can actually start thinking about a quadrilateral rather than trilateral cooperation?
I think you're onto something for sure, and I'm glad you asked that question at the very beginning, because it's true that there's huge emphasis right now, huge focus on performance issues and deployment issues and budgetary issues, and it's normal because we are going through a difficult process of rethinking, realignment. But I think all of these reviews have pointed to the need of consultation, and so whether it's 4, 5, or 6 parties.
No, I'm thinking of something beyond consultation. I'm thinking of the reviews of the mandates.
Of the reviews of the mandate.
And the host nation, as we, as the conflict dies down,
yes,
and as we move into a phase of peace building, do you imagine a scenario whereby the host nation brings in its priorities and it becomes part of the review of the mandate, part of the exit strategy?
Well, so part of the review of the peacebuilding architecture recommends, and I think the Security Council in that presidential statement has at least committed itself, when appropriate and according to circumstances, to engage the Peacebuilding Commission. Now, the Peacebuilding Commission is a platform that is very much at the disposal of member states, and particularly the host countries, to be able to bring their particular perspective on how they see the transition of a mission moving out. So it's a more open dynamic, and it involves the crucial stakeholders, not just the United Nations, but the international financial institutions, the regional and sub-regional organizations, the private sector, civil society. And as we saw, for example, in the case of Liberia, the transition, the phasing out of the mission was accompanied by a request of the Security Council for the Peacebuilding Commission to work with the government of Liberia in the formulation of a peace-building exit strategy. And I think that is unique, it's new. It happened again when Egypt was in the Security Council. I think the government of Sweden and others took a very strong lead in trying out this concept, which translates itself and gives the opportunity for the governments, the host governments, to actually inject its views, its priorities, and its vision. Because at the end of the day, for a true sustaining peace, peace-building dynamic, you need that long-term vision that goes beyond the end of the mandate of the mission. So the issue of how quickly and to what extent we transfer parts of the mandate to national institutions, I think is something we will discuss tomorrow, but it's a crucial part because unfortunately, many times we see a substitution effect taking place. And so this is what regular reviews that the Secretary General is so keen in doing repeatedly, is to do quick course corrections. When we feel that the national authorities are taking leadership, ownership, accountability for its own political national development processes, those tasks immediately have to be transferred, and the role of the development partners, the UN, the financial institution, is to shoulder up that national responsibility so that the mission is not being asked to do everything. The multiplicity of tasks that we discussed this morning, at the very beginning one can understand that this stabilization effort requires a strong initial presence. But we haven't been good at quickly redesigning and redimensioning the mandate according to the capacities of national institutions to take up. And the quicker we do this, the better, because the mission mandate time could become shorter, and we work with national actors in a different way. I think the Peacebuilding Commission, there's a lot of potential. Its potential is only as good as the Council wants to use that potential, but also I think it would be fair to say that it's important that when the Peacebuilding Commission engages with the Security Council, that it is able to bring really a strategic perspective, that it can bring value added to the discussion by pointing out the missing elements of the discussion. And they tend to be around peacebuilding, around the many aspects of what we talk about, the primacy of the political, the inclusiveness, how do we translate peace agreements into agreements that reconcile a nation. Those issues that have to do with a lot of political, cultural, sociological issues are the type of things that the Peacebuilding Commission can be addressing, issues of transitional justice, DDR, SSR, but in the context of developing the national institutions to reconcile, to be more inclusive, and to address the issues of grievances, of exclusion, and discrimination that sometimes lead to these type of conflicts.
One final question. Peacebuilding architecture at large is not very old. It's quite new as a matter of fact.
Yes.
But one recent development has been, Peacebuilding Support Office and the Peacebuilding Architecture has traditionally and historically, for the duration that is limited, 15 years old, has worked on nations. And then there is the work of the PBSO on the Sahel and Sahara region. That is new.
It is.
Last month we had, and your office has participated in that, the workshop on the operationalization of the African Union policy on post-conflict reconstruction and development, with a particular focus on the Sahel and Sahara region. Is that the nature of things to come? Because of the transnational nature of the threats, the challenges to peace and security, the recognition that in the Sahel and Sahara region these issues are very interlinked and interconnected. Do you see that happening in other places in the world?
Well, this is, again, it's an excellent question because it speaks to the reality of the evolving and changing nature of conflict and the changing nature of threats to international peace and security. So you're exactly right. This is a huge challenge for my office, but also to the Peacebuilding Commission that has been requested by the Security Council to support the efforts, for example, of the UN Office for West Africa, headed by SRSG Chambas. As you know, the UN has undertaken a very extensive exercise to recalibrate, to refocus the integrated strategy for the Sahel. Our Deputy Secretary General has really been leading this effort. The production, which was discussed in the annual session of the Peacebuilding Commission. Now, the Secretary General has a particularly powerful instrument to drive what we see as a big challenge, UN coherence and strategic, if you will, response to such a thing like the Sahel integrated strategy. And it is the Peacebuilding Fund. This is the Secretary General's Peacebuilding Fund has proven itself to be very quick, very fast, flexible, catalytic, and with a high appetite for risk taking. And I say this because a lot of the issues that need to be addressed in the Sahel many times have to do with cross-border dynamics. And so the transnational nature of conflict,
organized crime,
and the presence and the dynamics of non-state actors actually put a big onus now to, in one sense, help extend the presence and legitimacy of state institutions to some of the border areas that have remained governless, but also to work with local populations and to somehow strengthen the social cohesion, the social contract, if you will, between local populations, the state, and to see peace building as a combination of issues that address security concerns, development concerns, participation concerns, and resolution of conflicts that are linked very much to the issue of management of natural resources, land, water, the tremendous impacts of climate change and the stress that this produces on local production. So the Peacebuilding Fund has become a strong, how can I say, it's an investor of first resource to help catalyze initiatives and show, if you will, a way forward. It has been instrumental in mobilizing the participation of women and young people, which is a very important part of the peace-building agenda. But it has also, how can I say, extended and worked with local administrations in improving the performance of social service delivery, creating inclusive development participatory approaches. So with small amount of money, we have been able to help redesign development projects that much bigger actors like the World Bank or the Africa Development Bank or the European are able to scale up. So there's the notion of catalytic investment, the proof of concept, if you will, of an approach that seeks to involve people, a people-centered approach. So working a lot with the SDGs, the 17 goals in mind.
Assistant Secretary General Taranco, thank you very much for this interview, and we wish you the best of luck with the work of the Peacebuilding Support Office. We're looking forward to your intervention tomorrow and to the opportunity to work with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.